Our inscription is the Māori Freelander Archive, which is one of the most significant photographic archives in New Zealand in the second part of the 20th century. Māori Freelander is a female photographer and camera artist, and I think when we think about documentary heritage, we often don't think about an artist's work, but I think that's what's quite exciting about this particular inscription is Marty, who was a photographer for over 60 years, came to New Zealand in 1958 and took photographs pretty much every day of her life. And she had an immigrant's perspective on New Zealand. By that I mean she saw things with fresh eyes. She saw the change in New Zealand around her. It was a time of great social change, and she photographed people, places, protests, the politics and the progress of New Zealand. The archive itself is large. There's over 5,000 vintage prints. Marty had a dark room for most of her life, and she printed most of her black and white photographs. She took a little bit of colour, but she liked to print things herself. So every image has Marty's kind of indelible stamp on it. She did a lot of cropping of images, and she really worked really hard to put her perspective into those images. She photographed significantly a number of kuia. She did that series with Dr. Michael King in the early 1970s. And these images not only have, I'd say, New Zealand significance, but really an international significance in terms of Indigenous women worldwide. And of course, they're photographs that can never be taken again. And I think Marty was very conscious of the fact that her photographs were a legacy, essentially. And she always encouraged young photographers to get out there and photograph what they knew and for the stuff that their generation knew, because she knew that in time people would look back and go, well, how interesting, how amazing that people live like this. So she always photographed with that view. You know, she photographed pretty much anybody, and she was a really forthright kind of person. She'd go up to Walter Nash, or she'd go up to anybody really and say, I want to take your photograph. And they would usually say yes to Marty. So her archive is full of artists, politicians, people from that era that we all remember, and she took some of the most iconic images of them. She also took her camera onto the street and she filmed protests, and a lot of these things were real cultural touchstones for New Zealanders. Springbok tour protests, women's movement protests, nuclear disarmament, they're all there in the archive. It's very significant for Auckland Art Gallery to be registered in Memory of the World New Zealand Register, particularly for our library, the E.H. McCormack Research Library, because I think what it does is that it gives us a broader cultural role, and it also is a way of sharing and preserving our collections, and it has not been an easy time for art libraries, particularly in Auckland this year, and so I think it does, you know, is significant for our wider cultural mandate.